topic is trends in coaching, community coaching. And one of my hobbies is trend spotting. Is trying to see into the future what's going to happen. We live in a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, chaotic and ambiguous world. So making these kind of predictions is really difficult.
John, do you need a
Hold this one or stand over here, or both in the process. Okay, we'll try both of those. So we fly into the future and often our eyes are covered in the process. But as I fly in, I collect data and I come to certain conclusions. So what you're going to find are my assumptions, my perceptions, my experience in that process, and I'd love you to challenge me afterwards. I believe you're not allowed to ask questions as we go through the process. So let's look into the future and see what we can see in the process. And very much it depends on how we join the dots. Some of us would put the dots together and we'd come up with a picture a bit like that. Others would put together the dots and come up with a picture like that. So this is how I put the dots together in this particular process of spotting what are the trends that are going on in coaching, which is the area I'm particularly interested in. So you're looking for what is going to increase, what's going to get better, what's going to get more of, and you're looking at what's going to get less of, what's going to vanish. Typewriters, gone in the process, for instance. So one of the things that I determine is declining is particularly corporate investment in external coaching. I'm picking up a lot of information, both from America, the UK, and South Africa particularly, that particularly the larger corporates are spending less on external coaching and executive coaching in the process. What is happening in its place is the growth of internal coaching. And largely, it's a consequence of the spend on external coaching that is driving internal coaching, developing people within the organization to coach. Sometimes very specifically as coaches, and HR particularly takes on the role as the coach. Some organizations are now creating jobs where the title is coach and that's all the person does. And in some, they're developing their managers as coaches. Sometimes coaching their team in performance management and sometimes coaching others across functions in their process. The City Council, Cape Town City Council, has taken 45 of their staff through an internal coaching process and developing that. And it's happening in a lot of the large organizations as well. What it does say is there is still executive coaching at the top of the organization, but lower down in organizations, more and more they're depending on their own internal coaching in that process. So definitely that's been one of the trends. Another trend that is growing is team coaching. More and more organizations are undertaking team coaching, partly as a consequence of the spend on executive coaching in order to manage their costs, but also partly because so many organizations are dependent on teams. And most teams, and I generalize, are dysfunctional. And team coaching is a wonderful way to help those teams become functional in the process. Another trend is the growth of virtual coaching, and that is using technology, whereby the coach and their client are not in the same room, but maybe in different continents. And technology has hugely grown that, where you could sit in your room at home and coach somebody in India or in Paraguay or wherever in the world in that process. That seems to be growing quite rapidly. The other area that I'm noticing is the one that I'd like to talk about this evening, is growth in community coaching. Briefly, to unpack the word community, because it has multiple meanings. It's like a suitcase filled with all of these different meanings in the process. What tends to tie it together is it's a group of people with common interests. So you'll find literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different communities around, whether they're tied together by their religious common interests, their business interests, or their location, wherever it is that they live in that process. In coaching, we talk about niche communities of coaches. Two broad niches are business and life coaching. They have their particular communities that they work with in that process. So the business coaches work in particular niches, the life coaches work in particular niches. And in between them is what we talk about is community coaching in that process. So community in a South African context has a particular meaning. Mostly to us it means a community of less privileged, economically disadvantaged, and often based in a particular location, which we call townships in South Africa. And it's that kind of a community that I'm going to refer to in terms of community coaching. What is happening there? If we looked at the broader picture of coaching in South Africa and said, well, in that total population, how many are we in South Africa? 55, 56 million at the moment? Yeah. Of those, who could afford coaching? It's a relatively small group who can afford coaching. By far, within that group, there's as much smaller who are actually receiving coaching. So the market is potentially huge in that way. The need for coaching is particularly huge. But more interesting is those who can't afford coaching. How could we use this powerful process within those communities? And at the moment, if we looked at who is receiving coaching in the communities in the South African sense, it's a tiny proportion. And that's the area that I think, and I'm predicting, is going to grow hugely. And I'd like to give you some of the kind of examples of where and how it is happening in the process. So unpacking that little dot of those within the community who are receiving coaching. The first place that coaching is occurring is often within NGOs and NPOs. And in South Africa, we have 126,294 registered NPOs with the Department of Social Affairs, I think they're called, in that process. So there's a multiplicity. What has been happening is quite a number of these NPOs have been using coaching specifically for their management. The coaches are often drawn from the coaching schools, and it is therefore pro bono. It's for the coaches to build up their hours. But what is happening, and I've picked this up from a number of different areas, is that more and more of the NPOs are seeing the value of coaching, feeling the benefits of it, and now starting to budget for it. One of the originals, particularly here in Cape Town, is the Clothing Bank. And they took on coaching, and they were using students from some of the coaching schools. They are now budgeting, and they're starting to pay their coaches. And more of the NPOs are seeming to say there is huge value in the coaching of our management in order to do our work more effectively, and we get a budget and we're going to start paying the coaches in that process. But more interesting is the way that they're using coaching in their interactions with the communities that they work with. And I'd like to share a couple of stories about what has happened here. The one that is particularly interesting happened in correctional services. In fact, it happened out at Paulsmoor Prison. Coaches undertook a coaching program of coaching those prisoners who were going to be leaving prison 3 months before they left, 3 months after they left in the process. Despite the fact it was a very small sample that they used, they were able to change the recidivism rate from 85 to 15%. There's a lot of disagreement about what South Africa's recidivism rate is, and that is the rate at which people leave prison and come back to it. It is generally agreed it's around 85%. It means of every 100 prisoners who leave prison, 85 come back into prison. If we could change that through coaching to 15%, imagine the consequences. It costs 8,000 Rand a month to keep a prisoner in prison. Imagine what the savings could be there. And then imagine what the impact could be on crime in that process. Huge possibilities. The other area in which much coaching has taken place has particularly been in education. And there have been a range of coaching projects in education. Quite a number of them here in the Cape Town area. The Dinaledi project, the Seed, New Leaders has been working up in Gauteng, Jet has been working in Mpumalanga. And they have had some wonderful results that have been coming through. Mondesi was coaching in Free State schools last year, and they changed their matric pass rate from 65 to 85%. And he attributes most of that to the coaching that happened in that process. So just again, think of the consequences if our education departments were really to use coaching in the way that they work. Practitioner coaches have been working with those groups of people, working with the department directors, not very many of those, but more and more taking it on. And the two provinces that are most advanced in South Africa are the Western Cape and Gauteng, in that sense, in terms of utilizing coaching. Quite a few of the coaching projects have realized the close connection between the department officials and the principals. The department people actually work with the principals, are coaching both of those two in the process. And then quite a number of the projects have faced coaching in the school, coaching the principals, the management teams, and all the teachers. A big challenge there is, of course, finance. And this has usually been raised from trusts who pays the coaches in their process. But the results, again, have been wonderful, and I could tell you all the sorts of stories about what has been coming out of that coaching. The other area that is growing is what we've called community coaches and mentors, and I'd like to take you through, and they're working directly with learners in schools. I'd like to take you through 3 particular examples of this. The coaching of teachers is focused not on how you teach, but on how you're dealing with being overwhelmed. Because a major challenge for most teachers is that they're totally overwhelmed with class numbers, with work, with admin that they have to do. And the coaching is focused particularly on those. But it's working with learners that I'm particularly interested. I've been working with Life Choices, which is an NPO here in Cape Town, and particularly their Leaders Quest program. It is a program in which there are coaches who have 3 or 4 schools that they are responsible for. They call for volunteers to participate in the Leaders Quest, and they are coached and mentored through 18 months. The last 6 months of their grade 12 year and the first 12 months of moving into new studies or new careers in that process. They have called on volunteers to mentor and to coach these learners in the process. It's been a challenging process for a variety of reasons, but again, the results are starting to come in of what the benefits have been to the learners in this process. And if any of you want to make a contribution, it's a wonderful way to become a mentor on one of these programs and work with the learners in this process. Ikamva Youth has a very similar program of coaching and mentoring grade 12 learners through their final year and into the first year of life outside school. They have been piloting in Ivory Park up in Gauteng with the intention of spreading to all of the other branches of Ikamva Youth in that process. And the last example that I'd like to mention is Schools at the Centre of Community, Partners for Possibility, which is set up as a leadership program in which, sorry, I'm pressing the wrong buttons here, set up as a leadership program. Somebody from a business or an organization works with a principal over at least a period of a year and coaches and mentors them to develop that school at the Centre of Community. They started about 5 years ago here in Cape Town. They're now in over 400 schools around the rest of South Africa. And again, the success stories of what's come out of that process has been wonderful. And as I was doing my digging and looking for these trends, this came up. A whole new form of what is called community coaching coming out of the States. A coach can be an external guy who supports communities and organizations in identifying and achieving their goals. So they find a community, they get a team of people called the creative team. The coach works with them to develop a creative placemaking plan and helps the team leaders develop their skills so that they can guide and oversee the implementation of the plan in the long haul. And that seems like a wonderful idea. Haven't heard of any of that in that particular way working in South Africa. There are a lot of other community work that goes on in the process. So my prediction is that this is an area that's going to grow and holds huge benefits for our country. We're going to need, I think, at least 40,000 coaches to do this kind of work in the process. The challenge, of course, is money. How do we afford it? But there are lots of areas in which you can apply those skills in terms of job creation and entrepreneurship. Why aren't we training the unemployed to be coaches, to coach in their community? Whether they earn 5 Rand or 10 Rand for a session, that's 5 or 10 Rand more than they had before, and they can be making a difference to the people that they're coaching in that process. Certainly in terms of health and parenting, there are opportunities. There was a project with the GCC Rainbow Convention where they coached trauma nurses. Now the rate of burnout amongst trauma nurses is huge, and how they showed that coaching can benefit those trauma nurses in the process. Coaching for space, our area in the process, Roland's exterior of the place. How can we help people create spaces that are comfortable, that are welcoming, that make happy people in the process? And as I mentioned, the possibilities of coaching to reduce crime in South Africa. So that's it, my own time. Unfortunately, we'll have to ask some questions afterwards, but I'd love to hear from you. What are the trends that you're spotting? What's going on outside in that world there? And I will hold you to what it is that you're spotting. Thank you very much.